I'm a 2:17 marathoner trying to take that next step and close the gap between myself and the elite runners. At this level, every tiny detail matters. Now you've heard those trendy buzzwords, zone 2 cardio, threshold training, lactate monitoring. In this modern era, surely I'm taking into account all this cutting edge research, right? No, forget all that bollocks, we're going old school. Let's take it back to the 70s when running was a simple sport. Train harder, not smarter. So I'm sure you guys have seen plenty of runners online banging on about different marathon sessions, training plans, but I can guarantee you've not seen this. So in this video, I'm going to explain why I've decided to take inspiration from a runner from 50 years ago. Instead of the modern training approaches, I've decided to go old school. We're going to get all into that, but it all started with this right here, the holy grail, the Bible of marathon running in Japan. So the Japanese title, Nihon no Marathon wa naze dame ni natta no ka. I can just about read the title. It translates as, why did the Japanese marathon go wrong? And underneath it says, the voice of the 7 samurai who broke the Japanese record. So basically this book is a collection of 7 of the best Japanese runners ever, from 209 runners down to 206. Basically the legends of the game, and they're chatting about why the Japanese marathon has gone wrong recently. So if you don't know, the Japanese used to be the best in the world back in the sort of 70s and 80s, and now obviously the East Africans are taken over and they get into their training, so their old school methods, why they worked back in the day, and then they try and work out why the newer guys haven't been able to hit the same heights. And that's a whole different video in itself. I guess a follow-up to that video I did about why Japanese runners are better than Westerners. We've got to look at some point at the other side, why aren't they as good as the East Africans? But that, my friends, is a story for another day. So in this one, we're going to be getting into the actual training that they were doing. It's fascinating. And if you stay to the end of the video, then I'll actually show screenshots of their training guides. So if you want to follow along at home, then be my guest. So I originally got this book basically to just practice some Japanese reading because the textbooks are so boring. And I thought it's more interesting actually learning about the running here. I quickly discovered that that would be absolutely impossible. Not only do they read back to front, they also read up to down, and they have thousands and thousands of these kanji, these Chinese characters here. I think it took me about 2 hours to read the first page. So thank God for the Google Translate picture function. Absolute game changer. I basically read this entire book through the Google Translate picture app. And today I'm going to be focusing on one runner in particular who I've actually based this entire Tokyo Marathon training block from. He is the one and only Shigeru So.
Who the fuck is that guy? Who the fuck is that?
Let me introduce to you the fastest running twins in history, Shigeru and Takeshi So. So this book only details Shigeru's training, but they always used to train together, and both of them were absolute weapons, Olympians back in the day. And Shigeru held the world record in 1978 with a 2:09.05. So almost 50 years ago, before the super shoes, before all the science came in, the testing, the lactate, all of that rubbish. They were absolutely battering the training and still running ridiculous times. Their base mileage was pretty infamous. So they had these famous training camps. They'd go to New Zealand often. And one time they knocked out a 125-kilometer run at a casual pace that they described as a jog, 4 minutes per K. So their philosophy was basically they can't beat the Western runners for speed. Like their 5K and 10K was way slower. So they had to just outwork them and become so much stronger that then they could drop the faster runners in the last 10K of a marathon, which is basically the same idea as me. I've got no speed, so I've just got to work harder than everyone. So after reading all about Shigeru's training and kind of picking out the key points, looking over his training plan, I've come up with what I think are the main takeaways and the biggest differences from Western training. So we're starting with pretty standard. It's a 3-month training block, and you've got the volume of 1,000K a month. They use that in Japan. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that that's an absolute staple. And so of course, yeah, he's on those 1,000K months. And it's not like that's the whole purpose of the training. It's just that they think that 1,000K month helps support the big sessions. It's like the backbone that supports all the hard training. You can't do these crazy sessions we're going to get into if you haven't got that easy volume first from all that kind of base mileage. And so the big emphasis for their training is all on the steady long runs. And they start off being relatively comfy. I mean, still a decent pace. It's not a jog. And then throughout the block, they get quicker and quicker. And they always use, for some reason, that 40K mark. So it's always starting at 40K 40K. From the beginning, you've got to be able to comfortably knock out 40K runs. And then throughout the block, nearly every week, you're doing one of these long runs of 40K, getting progressively quicker and quicker and quicker until you hit the pinnacle, the key session, which is a 40K time trial. And the idea is that whatever you run for that 40K in training is what you should be able to run for the actual marathon in a race. So for him, he'd be aiming for a 2:09 in training for that 40K, which would be about 95% of goal marathon pace. And then in the race, yeah, he goes and knocks out a 2:09. Simple as that, simple maths. And so this week, we're kickstarting the block with the first 40K run. Let's get out there and pound some pavements. Whew. It is bloody freezing this morning. I'm having to do a little jog before I even start the long run. So I think out the gates, I struggle breaking 5 minutes per K. So I'll get a couple K easy in and then we'll get into a decent pace. So this long run, this steady long run, absolute staple of my training for the last couple of years. I'd say pretty much every week I've done 35 to 45K at a decent pace, and it's just turned my legs into units. It's that strength there that you need for the marathon. I think if you're training for shorter distances like 5K, 10K, you can get away with a kind of easier pace. The long run probably isn't as important, but for the marathon, to try and run a quick time, the challenge isn't completing the distance, that's no problem. It's actually doing it at pace. So I like to get moving on the long run. So what I've got on the cards today is 40K between 3:35 and 3:40. Might sound very specific, but there's a reason. We'll get into that later. Every pace that I run at the moment on these either sessions or long runs is based off calculations I've done from Shigeru So's training. My motto is train harder, and I like to joke around that, yeah, I just go out there and absolutely hammer it, but there's actually a lot of planning that goes into it, and there's method to the madness. All right, warm-up done. I can't say I'm exactly much warmer. It's still absolutely freezing. Can't feel my hands, but I think we should probably get going. I'll just do a couple little swings so I don't tear a hammy or something in the first K. And we're off. 40K. Right, we're ticking along nicely. About half an hour in. This pace is comfy-ish, but like if I switch off completely, it could easily drop. So I've got to stay locked in. And if anyone's wondering how I pass the time on a solo run like this, it's all about the podcast. It's either running podcast, Arsenal, or MMA. Those are the three classics, my go-tos. So through 10K in 36 flat, and I'll get a first gel in now. So I aim for basically a gel every 10K, just to, you know, keep that energy up. And apparently it helps recovery, so yeah, you're not absolutely battered the next day. So just gone through halfway, averaging 3:36, so yeah, nicely on pace. Feeling decent though, starting to get a bit tired. Just got to slog it out. Get a second gel in now, and that'll give me a nice little boost. Well, I've turned back around for the final 10K. Got back the headwind. I was thinking, oh, I'm cruising down the other side, and then turn back around. Woo, it's gonna be a little tough. All right, 40K. Done. So it ended up being a fairly tough one. Just sort of crept up on me. I'm feeling great at halfway, and then slowly a bit of fatigue setting in, hit the headwind turning back, but managed to average 3:37 overall. So yeah, good pace, bang on in that range I was hoping for. So now I've just got to refuel and get some good grub in. Now I'm in my classic post-long run food stops, this little cafe right nearby. I'm gonna try and keep my voice down a bit because I don't wanna be that obnoxious foreigner causing a scene in public. And so this is a brand new segment. I've got to shout out my boy AOB for the name. It's gonna be Scran to Japan. Genius. I'm gonna be showcasing the best food that Japan has to offer. And right here, we've got probably the least Japanese meal of all time. So Western bakery, but we've got a few little twists. So this is something that you definitely can't get abroad. It's called curry pan. Basically, curry-filled fried bread. Unbelievable. Oh yeah. I'm always very low on energy after a long run, so I've got to fuel up before the train ride home, get that food in ASAP for recovery. Now I'm going to try and remember going forward that whenever I eat something weird in Japan or just completely different, I'm going to try and film it because I think you guys will find it interesting. I always try and go on my way to try different things. So I've had raw horse already. I've had squid guts. I haven't managed to try whale yet. They'd run out, unfortunately, at my local sushi place when I went, but I'm going to have to give that a go at some point. So Scran to Japan, the weekly segment. Keep an eye out for some wacky Japanese food on the way. Yeah, all right, you fat bastard. Now back to the chat about Shigeru So's training. What are the other key elements of his marathon block? To support those 40k runs, you've also got 20 to 30k tempo runs, which are a little bit quicker, getting closer to actual marathon pace. And so I've started following along to this block myself, and I just on the weekend completed one of these 30k runs. I managed to convince a couple teammates to help me out because slogging it out solo wouldn't be the most fun. So they joined me for 20k of it, and then I picked up the last kind of 5k, aiming for that target race pace. Average around 308, 309 per K for the final 5K. So it's like a 15:45. Pretty tasty, we were moving. And then the rest of the run was around like 3:21, I think it was. So pretty solid pace and nice little tempo. And that will hopefully just get quicker and quicker as this block progresses. And then on the other side of things, you've also got the speed sessions, and it's super simple. So he only, for these 3 months, uses 3 speed sessions, the whole block. It's only 1K reps, 2K reps, and 3K reps. And the volume normally adds up to about 8 to 10K of hard running, and you're looking at around 10K race pace. So those are the main elements there. You've got the big mileage, the steady long runs, the hard tempos, and then the quick 10K race pace kind of speed sessions. So how exactly does that compare to the Canovas of the world, the modern day coaches? How are they training marathoners, and what are we doing differently? So for starters, the volume is obviously higher. I don't know many modern day marathoners that are knocking out 250k. I mean, other than the Japanese guys, obviously, but yeah, in Europe and America, seem to be a little afraid of the mileage, scared of going over. Here, yeah, they're comfortably getting up to 150 at least. And also to do that, they often do a lot of triple days, which apparently is pretty common in Kenya as well. So they might knock out like a 10k easy in the morning, then do a 11 o'clock, their proper like session of the day, speed session, tempo, and then go out in the evening again for another little 12k or so, just to, you know, top that mileage up, keep it moving. Also something that I noticed that he did, which I'm not gonna do because I just think it's too risky, but he does these insanely intense spells. So back to back, long run, then sessions, then another steady run, then a long run, like packed into something like 4 or 5 days, often when they go to training camps. And so they just decide to go completely mental during the training camps, start hammering the running as much as possible. And then they'll have like a week of easy jogging. So I'm gonna try and keep it slightly more balanced. So I'll keep the structure very, very similar with the same sessions and everything, but try and even it out a little bit more, just because I think it's risky with injuries if you're absolutely smashing the runs and then you don't get much time to recover. But I guess I just need to toughen up. Maybe I just can't hack it, but just for this marathon, yeah, we'll play it safe. I'd say another big difference though as well is those tempo runs. So in the West, we tend to do broken stuff at marathon pace. So I used to do a lot of stuff like 5x5k, trying to hit target marathon pace, or like 3x10k, 4x7k with maybe float recoveries or easy recoveries, but you're always getting that recovery, that break. So you're never really doing an extended period at a hard intensity marathon pace. You're always getting that recovery. So they see that as a weak option, because in a race, you can't just be like, oh, I'm a little tired here, fancy a break, let's just have a little stop on the side. So they're training the mind, training the body to just keep pushing through tiredness, fatigue. So even though you're running slightly slower than marathon pace, you're doing it continuously for way, way longer with this Japanese style. And in the speed sessions, I think Western athletes like to overcomplicate it a lot, like try and do these fancy sessions like, okay guys, so the workout today is gonna be super simple. 2-mile threshold, keeping your lactate between 1.3 and 1.7 millimoles. Then we'll do a 500-meter jog, straight into alternating laps between half marathon and 10K pace. Then finish up the set with 4 times 150-meter dash, progressively increasing the intensity from a 7 to a 9 on the effort scale. And then we just repeat it all 3 times. You guys got it? Nah, none of that bullshit. They just keep it super simple. Same reps. If you're doing a 1K session, you're just doing 1Ks. You're doing a 3K session, you're just doing 3x3K. There's not these kind of pace changes, these intervals. There's like a very clear focus. Each session has a purpose. We're not trying to mix in a whole load of different zones and stuff within it. So I realized as I was looking through his trainings, this is from 50 years ago, I suddenly thought, hang on, this sounds very similar to what I've actually been doing already for the past year while living in in Japan. And that's because in Japan, when something's done a certain way, changing that is near impossible. They love to keep it old school. And so I was collaborating with teammates for a lot of the sessions, a lot of the workouts that I've been doing. But it's basically the same as what the guys were doing back in the 70s and 80s. The training almost hasn't changed here. And so it's pretty much been passed on through generations, because all the best runners, so like Shigeru actually and his brother, they're now coaches of some of the pro teams. And then when runners retire, they'll probably join the coaching ranks. And they've pretty much passed on the same sessions that they were doing back in the day to their athletes now. And so some of my teammates back in the day were pro runners, or they were on some of the top Ekiden teams like at university. And so they were taught these exact same sessions that Shigeru and the others, the old school boys, were doing before. So it sounds pretty extreme. Like the dream would be make it as a pro runner. So why am I looking at guys from the 70s and the 80s for inspiration? Like what am I playing at there? But actually it's because I've basically been doing this training already. So changing it isn't going to be too hard. Before it was maybe slightly more random, whereas this time I'm fully focusing on his training guide and following it. It's like the Bible. I'm worshipping this training guide. So we've chatted about what kind of training they're using, but the question is now, how am I going to apply that to my own running? So for this Tokyo Marathon build, I'm not just copying Shigeru's training. I'm literally doing the exact same training as him. I'll be doing the exact same volume, which conveniently I've been doing already. So 1,000K a month, that's standard. That's the backbone that helps support the real training, the sessions. I'll also be doing the exact same number of sessions, the type of sessions, and the intensity of those sessions. So I'm taking it to the extreme here. I'm going all in on this training, committing to the training plan. And so the only thing we've got to adjust slightly is the actual paces of those sessions, because he's slightly faster than me. So he's a 209 man, and I'm going to be aiming for 310 per K. You can work out what that is. It's around, 212, 213 marathon. I'm laying my cards on the table. I'm counting on that ferritin to boost my levels back up, and then hopefully I'll be flying then. But it means that his marathon pace is 303 per kilometer. So I have to adjust every session in accordance with that. And I've got so nerdy about this. I've taken every run that he's done and calculated what percentage of that marathon pace it is. So let's say it's a long run. He's running 320 per K. That might be like 87% of that 303 marathon pace. If he's doing intervals, 1K reps at like 250, then maybe that's 107%. So everything is either above or below that marathon pace, and you can just calculate a simple percentage. And then what I've done is applied every percentage to my marathon pace of 310. So for K reps, if he's doing 106% of 303, I'm doing 106% of 310. I hope people are following along and I'm not putting you to sleep, but if you've made it this far through the video, then you've got to be a proper running nerd, a fan of the sport. And you're not just here to watch me eat pastries in a bakery, so hopefully this is interesting. But what it means is I can hit the exact same intensity, so the effort for me will be exactly what the effort he was hitting. And these exact sessions, intensity, volume, timing, all of that, that's what helped him run a 209. So if I can get through it and hit all those required percentages and the splits, then it should mean that I can run 310 for the marathon, which would be a 212, I think. It's basically simple maths. Complete the training, get the result. And so you can follow this YouTube along week on week, see how it progresses. Maybe it goes horribly wrong. That's the fun of it. This really is a science experiment. And we'll find out on the 2nd of March, Tokyo Marathon, whether it's successful. So big up everyone that made it to the end of the video. I hope you found it interesting, entertaining, maybe a bit of both. But this has been Ran to Japan. Until next time, you know how it goes. Remember, train harder, not smarter.